Welcome to the Profitable Farmer podcast, where we share stories and tips to help you run a better farming business and create your very own freedom farm. If you're looking to work smarter and not harder in your farm business, welcome. You're in the right place. G'day, ladies and gents. I'm going out on a limb here. I have wrangled my wife, Jane Hutchings, finally. I've been wanting to have this podcast for some time. Janie, great to have you part of Profitable Farmer. How are you?
Well, thank you, Grant.
So there's a method to my madness here. Jane's been a physiotherapist for 25 years or thereabouts. Obviously been a mum more recently to our 4 children and obviously incredible in all of that, but has returned to her profession in a niche that I think is really relevant and really important to so many of us. We're talking about this today, but we can survive without food for 3 weeks. We can survive without water for 3 days. We can survive without breathing for 3 minutes. And we actually breathe 20,000 times a day. I often reflect that when we became parents, we weren't given a manual on how to parent, so we're winging it. In the same way with our body and our health, we weren't given a manual. So a lot of us are focusing on the food we eat, the exercise we do, the water we drink, and all those things. But often our breathing gets neglected. And Jane has arrived into a niche in the physio space that looks at the science of breathing and genuinely helps individuals navigate a whole host of conditions that when we look at them are linked to our breathing. So, Janie, great to have you on Profitable Farmer and keen to explore this whole concept of breathing.
Thank you.
So how did you come to this niche within the physio space?
Well, I was busy being a traditional physio and mum, obviously, and helping with all of our things. And I actually got myself into a situation where I was suffering really quite badly with hay fever. As a child, I had suffered with hay fever, but it must 6 or 7 years ago, it became so extreme in springtime. I couldn't exercise outside. I couldn't hang our sheets on the line. My response to the pollens in the air was just really full on. So I was taking pages and pages of antihistamines and still really struggling. So I was looking for an alternative solution. I don't like taking a lot of medication. So I was really looking for a way to manage my hay fever without the drugs. And I came across a breathing retraining course, which sounded like it would solve some of my problems. And I went off and did that course to sort out my hay fever. And I've really never taken another hay fever tablet again. It was very, very successful for me. And as I did that course and actually learnt and understood so much about the power of breathing, I really became very interested in sort of learning further and studying further. And so I went on and did that. And I think the real turning point for me was understanding how significant your breathing is on your childhood development. And with 4 of our own children, it was very obvious to me that some of our children were not breathing well, and that was having really significant implications for their well-being and their general health. And so that was where I sort of put my attention.
So just for our listeners, what are some of the conditions that can be improved significantly once we get control of and master breathing properly?
Well, there's I suppose 5 or 6 really key issues that I work to resolve with people. Sleep disorders are a very big one of those. So that covers snoring, sleep apnea, insomnia, and restless sleeping. So that's a pretty big, broad category. Anxiety and panic disorders are my next sort of biggest subset, and that does encompass a little bit of depression as well, but anxiety and panic primarily. We then sort of go on to asthma and hay fever, and then sort of work our way down into some of the more specific things with exercise issues and cramping and poor recovery and poor exercise performance. Stitches are very relevant to actually your diaphragm breathing control. So that's the ones that I work with most, yeah.
So a lot of us know that meditation is a valuable practice for mental well-being and mindfulness. How's this different, or how's this an extension of that? I think what I understand of this is that a lot of us mouth breathe, and that we're supposed to breathe differently from that. Do you mind just speaking to that point?
No, so I think it's really important to sort of clarify early that the major issue with the way that Western society breathes is that we overbreathe. So we breathe far too much air, and most people will be breathing 2 to 3 times the amount of air that your body actually needs. And so your body has to busily process all that air for no value at all. And so when you look at the profile of someone breathing, mouth breathing is a really big part of that, because it's very obvious. The mouth is a very big hole and it allows far more air to be consumed. So when you look at the way that people breathe when they're meditating, when you consume a lot of air and breathe a lot of air, the science behind it is that you let go of all your carbon dioxide, which actually has a really important role in the body. And it's one of its biggest roles is to calm your nervous system. So when you're deep breathing and getting rid of all of that air repeatedly, you're getting rid of the very important gas that winds down your nervous system. And so we find the very people that are prescribed mindfulness and meditation are the people who can tolerate it the very least in that sort of overbreathing format.
So carbon dioxide is actually an important asset in all of this?
Absolutely. Somewhere along the line, carbon dioxide has been completely misbranded as a waste gas and something that we need to get rid of. It's actually as important as oxygen. And when you look at the science, you can understand that without carbon dioxide in our bloodstream, the oxygen is there, but it actually can't be released from the red blood cells. And so it just is wasted. The more carbon dioxide you retain in your bloodstream, then the more oxygen you can make available to your cells. So to your brain particularly. 3 minutes of over-breathing leads to a 60% decrease in the blood supply and oxygenation of your brain.
So what's that mean?
So that means if you sit at your desk breathing heavily through your mouth while you're reading your email, then quietly your brain is just reducing its oxygen level to the point where you have a low-level brain fog that just sits there all day while you easily overbreathe. So breathing in a way that resolves that will actually give you a flood of oxygen to your brain, clarity, focus.
What's your assessment on how many people breathe poorly out of 100?
Well, I just was at a course a couple of weeks ago and we talked a lot about this. There's no question that between 25 and 40% of the population overbreathe. When you look into some really discrete sort of subgroups, when we look at anxiety and panic disorders, there's a host of scientific research that shows that 80% of anxiety and panic disorder sufferers overbreathe. And no cognitive sort of therapies actually address your breathing. It's hard to understand whether the breathing leads to the anxiety or the anxiety leads to the breathing, but we know that without resolving that nervous system wind up, we very unsuccessfully manage anxiety and panic. Yeah.
So for our farmers out there, struggle sleeping, hay fever, asthma, worry, anxiety, and then snoring, restless legs, broken sleep, all those things. A lot of us are even going to medication and to physical equipment that can help us navigate some of those things. You're suggesting that none of those things perhaps are necessarily needed, and a lot of those things can be resolved just by learning how to breathe properly.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you're interested in ownership and really taking control of your nervous system, which ultimately has such a big impact on the inflammatory sort of layers of your body and your exposure and your likelihood of developing inflammatory conditions, all sorts of musculoskeletal conditions, all sorts of autoimmune disorders can be brought back to your inflammatory sort of components. And so your breathing and the health of your nervous system is really fundamentally very, very linked. And, this is a really powerful way to actually have that nervous system in as good condition as humanly possible. Yeah.
So a lot of us are scientists, being farmers. Can you give us a bit more context? Can you give us a bit more about what happens when we've got too much oxygen in the system or not enough carbon in our blood? And the way you've explained it to me, it's quite interesting. Do you mind just giving our listeners a bit more understanding of the basic science behind this?
It's really, even as this is slightly embarrassing to admit, but even as a physio, when I first began studying in this field, I sort of thought, this is so wrong. That's not true. Carbon dioxide's a waste. We don't need it. And it's really interesting to sort of understand how it got such a bad label. But, in a nutshell, the air that we breathe is loaded with oxygen. We will never sort of, unless you have a serious cardiac condition, for the most part, people have access to more than enough oxygen. That oxygen gets breathed into our lungs and it passes into our bloodstream, where to be carried around the blood, I liken it to, it hops into a car that's driven by hemoglobin. That's a part of your red blood cell. And that hemoglobin then transports the oxygen around to wherever you need. So if you're exercising, it will be to your quads and your hamstrings. If you're at your desk, it will be to your brain. It just depends on what you're doing. But the simple fact is that hemoglobin can't release the oxygen unless carbon dioxide is available. And so when you breathe well, you have a really high level of carbon dioxide in your bloodstream. And so that oxygen can always be made available to where it needs to go. But if you're over breathing and getting rid of all your carbon dioxide, then the oxygen gets simply breathed out again. The hemoglobin cannot let it go. The carbon dioxide essentially is the key to get the oxygen out of the car.
So is it as simple as nose breathing, or you talk about volume of oxygen that we're taking in? Can you just give us a sense of what the ideal outcome is for someone?
Yeah, so nose breathing is a really big part of it, but you can be a nose breather and a really poor breather still. Yeah, so nose breathing is a really big piece. Using your diaphragm effectively is a really big part of it. So a lot of us breathe with our upper chest muscles and with some of your neck muscles. That's a very inefficient way to breathe, and it makes you breathe a higher volume. Yeah. So what we look for when we talk about ideal breathing is a very gentle, very regular breathing pattern. It's quite slow and it's not very deep. It's just very consistent, very even, a slow breath in, a slow breath out. A little pause at the end of your exhale is ideal. And when you're talking numbers, we're talking about 10 breaths a minute. But most people, if they sat and timed their breathing, would be well up above 15 breaths a minute. Yeah. But things like yawning, sighing, that regular throat clearing, they're all very big signs that your breathing's quite dysfunctional. The email apnea, the breath holding that happens at your computer when you find yourself suddenly breathing out when you focus and concentrating, that's another sort of red flag sign that your breathing is dysfunctional.
What happens to the quality of our breath when we're under stress or under pressure or working huge hours or even night shifts, tractors, headers, those things. So
yeah,
do you mind what actually happens when we're under the pump and we're breathing poorly in the wrong way with some of those sorts of conditions?
So really what happens when you look at it is once you start to overbreathe, you lose your vagal nerve stimulation, which is what really relaxes the body and what brings you you know, when your nervous system has a choice to be in sort of rest and regenerate state or fight and flight. And we really, you know, we were designed to be in fight and flight stage for, I don't know, such a small portion of our day, really, when there was actually a lion chasing us. But we end up now in that state perpetually. And so then your breathing becomes very irregular. It becomes very fast. It becomes quite shallow up here, but the volume of air that your body is consuming in the course of a minute is, as I said, triple what you actually need. And that then lets go of all your carbon dioxide, which then overstimulates that nervous system even more. And so it's just a very, very vicious cycle. What happens really very quickly after that is that your sleep quality completely plummets. And so when you have really high, sort of nice high levels of CO2, carbon dioxide in your bloodstream, then you really cycle through your 4 phases of sleep very nicely. And that last phase of sleep, the 4th phase, is where you get all your regeneration and your healing and that sort of thing. When you have really low carbon dioxide, you never get there. And so you never get into that restorative sleep pattern. And so then you wake up in the morning feeling just as bad as you did when you went to bed, even though you've been horizontal for 6 hours. And it just becomes a very self-fulfilling sort of cycle. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're stressed, not sleeping, then you mentioned brain fog as well earlier. How can this then lend to, you know, even poor decision making or
terrible decision making? It's dangerous. It's really dangerous when you look at the quality of sleep that some people get, and then they hop in the car and drive their family off to Wagga for the day or whatever. But yeah, making good, clear business decisions, relationship decisions, financial decisions, all stems back to the state of your nervous system and your brain's capacity to think clearly.
Yeah, your mental well-being.
Yeah.
So I've made progress. I'm 2/3 of the way through Jane's course, and I've got to say the quality of my sleep, the level of calm that I feel, the clear mind. And I think you say that I now don't snore as much.
No.
But that was sort of learning as a challenge for me in my late 40s.
Yeah.
Are significantly different. And I'm now starting to run and exercise nose breathing, and my stamina exercising has gone through the roof. So it's quite amazing to think that we don't learn how to breathe, but when we do, and we breathe in the way that you're suggesting that science would have us breathe, just the multitude of things that can improve in our sort of life and in our well-being. What results have you seen some of your clients get? Would you mind speaking to some before and afters, perhaps, of just
look, oh gosh, you should have told me you were going to ask that. You know, I mean, I look at my dad, who was my first guinea pig, and he's, you know, obviously a big supporter of mine generally, but he's also a very open-minded student, and he had slept terribly for as long as I can remember, really. And, you know, he now has amazing sleep quality. And, you know, the sleep's the thing that I am very passionate about, from children who are like 2 right through to people like my dad who are in their 80s. But, you know, there's no age this is not appropriate for. So I look at some of the new grad physios I worked with when I was still working in Wagga, and I was absolutely horrified at the lack of sleep and the quality of life they lived, just as, you know, newly graduated people with great jobs living in a regional centre, and the turnaround, someone sleeping 2 to 3 hours a night through to 7 hours, is huge. I've had really lots of success with people really having far better control of their asthma and coming off all their asthma medication. Lots of hay fever people like me never taking hay fever medication again. Energy levels and just ability to perform under stress is very different. Yeah.
So for husbands and wives on farm, the stress, the pressure, and then the natural pollen and other things. I think asthma and hay fever are real issues for us.
Absolutely.
But also, the anxiety, the worry, the stress, the pressure that comes with being farming families. What would you say to husbands and wives in those environments about how they could make a positive step in the right direction?
Oh, well, it's all about your appetite for taking control of it yourself, really. Yeah. It's very easy to fix. As you know, it doesn't take very long. It is a consistent thing, but when I work with people, it's really, a program that we work on your breathing. It's not something you need to work on for the rest of your life. Once you reset your breathing and retrain yourself to breathe in the way we were designed to, then that's something that your body actually runs with and adopts as your new found breathing pattern. So it's not a boring forever physio saga of exercises, which we're often very pinned to, but it does take a little bit of effort, definitely. Yeah, but it's very achievable very easily. I have my clients doing a lot of my clients do their breathing work in the car. Regionally, people spend a lot of time in the car, and even the kids I work with, it's a really good spot where you're stuck there. You can't get away. School bus is another great time. Nobody can see that you're doing it. You just can quietly do your breathing work while you're sitting there. Yeah. And so that's a really good starting point. People in headers, utes, vehicles, that all can be done while you're doing your daily stuff. Yeah.
And so 3 years ago, you put a course together helping people navigate this. Would you mind just explaining how that looks and how people can, what is the process that they move through with you if they want to move from, hay fever or anxiety or snoring or whatever it is through to a point where they're free from those things? Would you mind just giving people an overview?
No, so my course sort of is something that I designed after I'd done my training and worked with some of my inner circle, I suppose, and really sort of established how it was best rolled out. Although I tailor the program for each individual, the key parts of it are the same for everyone, really. So my adult program, which is the one that is probably most relevant for your listeners, is something that I usually say is about a 12 to 14 week program. And we start with some really comprehensive questionnaires that give me a lot of information about the client's medical background and their current status. So the questionnaires cover a lot of unusual questions that people sort of think this is so unrelated to my breathing. But as we work through the course, it's fascinating to see that you no longer need to get up to go to the loo at night. You don't have a glass of water by your bed anymore. You don't get a stitch when you're exercising. You don't have cold hands and feet anymore through winter. So because so many of your physiological systems actually are aligned with your breathing, the symptoms that I capture are quite broad. But it's all very, very much about the numbers for me. Having a health science background, I am sort of really focused on making sure we have a starting point and then we keep revisiting that starting point and we can see where your journey unfolds. But after we've captured all that information, we have a face-to-face over Zoom. I work with most of my clients over Zoom. And then my course is pre-recorded in 7 modules that just work step by step to resolve your breathing and get it towards the ideal. There's lots of education in there because I think it's really important that people understand the science of breathing and how it all ties together so that it gives some context to why you're doing what I'm asking you to do. But the modules each are sort of about 40 minutes, and then there's a really clear sort of program that you need to work on. And I have lots of text and phone contacts, Zoom contacts through the course to make sure that it's tailored and it's going where it needs to go for each person. Yeah.
Thanks, Jane. We'll share details of how you can access Jane's course and learn more in the written text that wraps around this podcast. High performance athletes are now diving into this and realizing the impact it can have on their performance on the sporting field, from marathon runners to rugby players to tennis players to our elite swimmers, and the list goes on. We've got quite a few athletes in our community who do focus intently on their fitness. What impact can this have for them?
Oh, it's huge, actually, really significant. Huge impact on an athlete's endurance as well as on their sort of high intensity performance. But the endurance and recovery is probably the biggest space that's currently being very scientifically sort of researched and to understand a little bit more. But our pinups of good breathing are people like Roger Federer. There's a few great runners. Iga Swiatek, the tennis player, is a very big sort of public advocate, and it's essentially the thing that will give you the edge under really extreme stress from an athletic performance. So it's about being very efficient with your oxygenation and your then the removal of all your lactic acid products. But there's great scientific research to give some real numbers around the reduction in that lactate production and the speed with which it gets removed from your muscular system.
So if I'm just a middle-aged farmer, how do I know that I'm a bad breather?
Well, so we've talked about a few things, but you can put it sort of into the top. So there's 5 ways you can really tell that your breathing is not what we would call ideal. And so when you look at those 5 things, I usually describe them as when your breathing's fast. So we've sort of talked about 10 breaths a minute being ideal. When you breathe through your mouth, never normal. Children should never breathe through their mouth. When you can hear your breathing, that's a problem. Our breathing should be really quite silent. And we all know what it's like to sit next to someone at the movies or on the couch. And again, children sometimes get sort of cute that you can hear them. It's not cute and it needs to be sorted out. If you can see someone breathing, then their breathing is dysfunctional. And that's when you can look at someone and see their chest sort of moving, their neck muscles contributing. And then the number 5 is irregular breathing. So that's all those things: sighs, yawns, coughing, sneezing, throat clearing, that sort of stuff. So on the other sort of end is our ideal breathing, which I would describe as slow, through the nose, silent, low, so down in your diaphragm, I shouldn't be able to see, and very gentle. So it's very even, it's very rhythmical. When I'm working, well, actually with everyone, but particularly with kids, it's really helpful for them to visualize a great breather is a cheetah. And so you sort of can have that visual in your mind. And a really poor breather is a Labrador. And so that's really helps you to sort of see the 2 extremes. We want to be like the cheetah.
There's some other celebrity examples of people. You mentioned Roger Federer, and I think Hugh Jackman has studied this as well. What are some examples of some really good breathers that we know and love versus some celebrities that perhaps don't do this well and their results might speak for themselves?
So another great sort of analogy is looking at Roger Federer and Nick Kyrgios. And they've played plenty of games of tennis. Roger Federer stands at one end of the court. We all know him. He's supremely calm. He's always in control, very rarely sweating. And down the other end of the field on the tennis court on the same day, same weather conditions, is Nick Kyrgios, who is yelling and screaming, sweating profusely, very unpredictable, very uncontrolled, and very much unregulated in his breathing. And if you can Google their visuals, you can actually watch a game. It's so obvious. Yeah. Another great pairing I like to say is Barack Obama and Donald Trump, and exactly the same again. So Barack Obama is so composed and regulated and That's who we want to be like, rather than Donald Trump, who is a bad mouth breather and is very unpredictable and sort of chaotic, you might sort of say. Yeah.
So Jane, you talk about how the carbon oxygen balance and getting that right is really important on so many levels for mental clarity and mental well-being, and all of those physical conditions. But you mentioned that sort of it impacts our nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just help us understand the link between the balance of carbon and oxygen in our blood and how that impacts our nervous system, and I guess a correction in that can see things improve?
Well, it comes back to that simple sort of transition of your body into that fight and flight response. So that's, you know, back in caveman times, everyone had a nice broad jaw, very straight teeth, no crooked teeth back then, and everyone breathed through their nose. And then when there became some alarming incident that sort of stimulated your nervous system and put you into that fight or flight mode, that's when your breathing did transition over into a high needs mouth breathing sort of requirement. But we now live there. Because that's how our bodies are processing all this air, we persistently live in the fight and flight state, which is a wound up nervous system response. The carbon dioxide is what brings that nervous system down. And so it calms and regulates your autonomic nervous system. And so as soon as you start keeping that inside rather than letting it go all the time, then that's what actually brings that calm and clarity and sort of peace to your body. Yeah.
So this can actually change jaw structure, you know, your teeth shape for kids, other things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And also if I'm short, sharp, grumpy, you know, all of those things, this can also change not my personality, but my physiology, and can see me arrive to life and my leadership role in farm and family playing from a very different place. Absolutely.
Yeah, because your body is under stress the entire time. Yeah. And so it's an overwhelming sort of state to be in, and it brings all sorts of health consequences. Yeah.
Jane, I interviewed Ginny Stevens from Active Farmers, and we talked about the importance of fitness on our mental well-being. We also talked about where diet fits in.
Mm-hmm.
What impact does poor choices in diet, so alcohol, coffee, and other things like that, have on our breathing, and how can they contribute to us not being at our best in this?
So there are some foods that have an immediate increase on your respiratory rate, and so they're your usual inflammatory sort of foods that a lot of people will identify, and they're your sugar, gluten, caffeine, alcohol. And while I always include food as a really important part of my program, and particularly with teenagers, I sort of feel the work I do with teenagers is really about setting them up for life, and for them to understand that I'm not preaching about you don't ever eat sugar or don't ever have a Coke, but if you're going off to do your maths exam, what you eat for breakfast in the morning will impact how you breathe for the rest of that morning, so that if you want to do well in that maths exam, let's choose some food that helps to keep your breathing nice and low. It's the same thing for you. If you're presenting at the deep dive, what you eat in the morning will have a huge impact on your breathing through the day. And so what you eat the night before will as well. So it's not something that I sort of get on my high horse about, but it's a really important part of the big picture. Yeah.
Janie, what is it that makes you so passionate about this?
Well, I just feel so passionate that this is so simple and it's so powerful and it's life-changing. So, I mean, it changed my life, there's no question. And as a result of sort of looking further into it, I could really see in our family, we had 4 children and we were the perfect little case study. We had 2 children who actually did breathe really well, and 2 who breathed really poorly. And once I understood that that was actually the root cause of what was going on, I just felt so sick that so many children can easily resolve many of the difficulties that present through childhood with some really simple stuff. And then unfolding this with adults, it gives just such a huge quality of life back to people. And I suppose that's what I was always in the business of trying to do, is trying to help people restore their health and live their best life. And I honestly feel that the work I do does help people to live their best life. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, it's been great having you on Profitable Farmer. Thank you. Well done on what you're doing. I see it have a massive impact on kids, grandparents, mums and dads, and every demographic. You just get so much good feedback about how something as simple as retraining around our breathing can just have such a profound impact in so many areas.
It really is very rewarding. And, my business is actually mostly driven by referral, and it's always the people that come to me through someone who's had a successful result from the course that really passionately wants to spread this a little bit further. So that's the real power in it, and the really good feedback that I love.
Thanks for your time, babe.
Thanks, Jem.
So we've done really important podcasts on the importance of fitness and physical well-being, in how that impacts our mental well-being and our ability to lead. We've had podcasts with Tracy Seacombe around her tips on how to live well and manage the stresses and pressures of life. I wanted to have Jane come on board and just connect with us on this breathing retraining, because we should all get 6 hours uninterrupted sleep as the baseline. And I know that so many of us, with the pressures and the stresses of farming, don't get that. And in addition, I know there's plenty of people out there with anxiety, with links to depression, not sleeping, even snoring, asthma, hay fever. Who would have thought that all those things could be corrected just by learning to breathe better? So it's an absolute credit to Jane. It's amazing to sit and watch the impact she's having on kids, on middle-aged mums and dads, and on grandparents. It's just fantastic. And so if any of that is relevant for you, jump on her website, enjoy her short course. And I hope in some small way this might set a few of you up to live a more energized and a clearer and a more fulfilling and enriching life. Thanks, and bye for now. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Profitable Farmer podcast by Farm Owners Academy. If you're new to this show, be sure to follow us. If you've been a long-time listener, let your friends know about us, or come continue the conversation in the Profitable Farmer Facebook group. All the best as you grow your business and create your freedom farm. Until next time, keep being incredible.